We will continue to bring you more developing news on that situation. But now to Europe, where Ukrainian forces have launched a fresh assault on Russia's western Kursk region, firing missiles and crossing into the area with armoured vehicles. That's according to the pro-Russian war bloggers in the region. This comes weeks after Moscow claimed to have ejected all Ukrainian troops from the region. Meanwhile, President Volodymyr Zelensky says a ceasefire could be possible, but only if the West ramps up the pressure on the Kremlin. Speaking in Prague, he warned that without global pushback, Putin has no incentive to end the war. Here is what the Ukrainian president and his Czech counterpart had to say.
Можливе абсолютно будь-який момент, хоч від сьогодні, і має тривати щонайменше 30 днів, щоб дати реальний шанс дипломатії. І я вдячний Чехії за підтримку в цій пропозиції.
Je třeba si připomenout, že pokud někdo má v rukou opravdu všechny karty k ukončení této války, tak je to prezident Putin, který to může udělat jediným rozhodnutím. Ale zatím žádnou takovou skutečnou vůli neprojevil.
US President Donald Trump mentioned that he had some good discussions on Russia and Ukraine. Let's take a listen in to what Trump had said.
Conversations on Russia and Ukraine over the weekend, over the last few days actually, but we've had some very good conversations on Russia and Ukraine. There's a lot of hatred there, I will tell you, between the two parties, between even the generals. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of hatred, but we've had some very good discussions over the last week.
The conflict remains highly volatile as the Russian defense forces say they've destroyed 26 Ukrainian drones aimed at Russian territories, out of which 4 drones were aimed at Moscow. This comes just days before foreign dignitaries are expected in the capital for a military parade in the Red Square. We're now joined by Joshua Barnes, correspondent of NewsX, to discuss this in more detail. Joshua, thank you very much for joining us once again. This obviously comes on 2 days before this expected ceasefire, or this proposed ceasefire from Vladimir Putin. What updates can you give us on the developing state of the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Well, yes, Thomas, a quick change of scenery as well. But no, the situation remains similar in the Russia-Ukraine war. Of course, negotiations have been going for months, with military action and strikes ongoing from both sides. Now, we're in a position where clearly this is the final moment before a lasting talk between Russia and Ukraine. Vladimir Putin made himself very clear that negotiations moving forward need to be with Ukraine directly in order to agree to a ceasefire deal. The United States earlier this week said that they would be taking a step back from these negotiations, but as we see often with Donald Trump, sometimes the messages are slightly conflicting. And as you said, and as we heard from him, he says talks are still ongoing. I want to point out the message that he had there with the amount of hatred that is seen between these both sides. Of course, Ukraine are very staunch in their goals and their desires ahead of any ceasefire deal. They want all of the Ukrainian territory. Around 20% of the country is now under Russian control, and Volodymyr Zelensky has been clear that that needs to be returned to Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russia is looking at expanding its country and has called this a fight against neo-Nazism and other things that Ukraine has been accused of. So both sides very contrasting. They both want different things, but a war that is being fought on the battlefields and has been for 3 years now. We're seeing devastating losses of life on both sides. Russia recorded its highest number of deaths on the battlefield in 2024 compared to 22 and 23, around 45,000 deaths reported. So this gives you an idea of the levels of loss. Of course, the economic situation being placed on Russia as well, with ongoing sanctions inhibiting and limiting the economic abilities of the country to grow. But we must look ahead to this proposed ceasefire from Russia, of course, around the time of the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. World leaders will be in Russia, and Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian leader, has said that those dignitaries cannot have guaranteed safety. So we wait to see what happens next in these negotiations. Ukraine pushing for a 30-day ceasefire, Russia wanting things on their terms and wanting an immediate 3-day ceasefire from the 7th to the 9th of May in the coming days. And we'll have to see if there's any movement from either side and a compromise can be agreed upon and a longer lasting ceasefire can be set up.
Joshua, the clock seems to be ticking for US mediation on the conflict. Donald Trump famously said that he was going to solve this conflict in one day. That hasn't seemed to have happened. But what updates can you bring us in regards to the US in them negotiating the end to this conflict?
Well, yes, the United States have been a key feature of any peace negotiations in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, as it is so far. All of these conversations have been held relating to this specific ceasefire deal. The conversations have been held with Russia and the US and held with Ukraine and the US. While there have been meetings of European countries and Ukrainian allies, direct talks with Russia and direct talks with Ukraine have taken place in Saudi Arabia. We know also that, of course, Zelensky has been to America to meet with Donald Trump and JD Vance, which ended in a complete blow-up and a halt on the minerals deal, which has now been signed. The US importance in this matter can't be understated. Steve Witkoff also has visited Vladimir Putin and spoken with him on 4 occasions. You mentioned it there, and it needs to be highlighted. Donald Trump said that this war would be done as soon as he took office for a second term. It hasn't. And I think for Donald Trump, he doesn't want this to come across as a defeat for him. He wants this to be a show of strength, a show of unity, a show of his peacekeeping abilities, something he's also repeated, of course, with Israel and Gaza for that short-term ceasefire that was in place. I think on one hand, Trump doesn't want this to go too much further, but it's also key for him that he is involved and his country is involved in ending this war if that happens. So I don't think US involvement will stop, but the flip-flopping and the rhetoric has changed from the United States. Possibly this could be applying pressure to both sides. Of course, Ukraine have signed this minerals deal that will see potential support for them. Russia, in this instance, have very few allies on the Russia-Ukraine war. And Trump's stance with Russia and his rhetoric with Vladimir Putin and the Russian country has been a generally positive shift from Joe Biden. So still negotiations to come, still US involvement expected, but we wait to see if that will be rescinded if this goes on for weeks and months.
Joshua Barnes, thank you very much for joining us. We now move on over to the United States, where US President Donald Trump has announced plans to impose a 100